Hi everyone, it's been a while. My name is Rain. This is my YouTube channel where I make vlogs updating on my progress for my writing projects. Most recently, it's primarily been about Project Diadem, which I've been working on the third draft. In January, I finished the first 55% of that third draft, and then I also left my job. And so February 1st through March, while I did return to my PhD student obligations, I was almost entirely focused, mentally at least, on writing stuff. And so at the beginning of March, which is when the following vlog starts, I decided to full send into pretending to be a full-time writer with a part-time job. Stay tuned for all of that if you want to keep following along with my progress, either on this book or on some of my other ones that I am currently making vlogs about that will someday get published. Subscribe, like, or leave me comments that help motivate me to actually post all these vlogs that I've been filming.
It is March 2nd, and it has been a month since I last talked to my camera about my book. On February 1st, I had my last day in my job, and then I returned full-time as a PhD student, even though I was technically already full-time since January. I also finished the first half of my book, the first two parts of it, really. I spent that first week of February polishing it a lot so that I could send it to some people I wanted to read it. My mother, some critique partners were going to get a portion of it towards the end. And I also kind of just randomly sent it to somebody on Fiverr. I've never done that before. I actually really enjoyed that experience, and I want to make a video separately on that. The feedback that I got from both the beta reader on Fiverr and, my friends and family and my critique partners, that has all been helpful for what has to be fixed in this first half before I can move on to the second half. But it also has been more motivating for what needs to happen after I finish the second half for the whole book, I think. I'm not going to call them draft 4 changes, but end of draft 3 changes is where I'm leaning. I need to not get too unfocused for my goal here, which is to finish this draft 3. I need to finish the second half to do that. I am working on these last 2 chapters, or 2 chapters towards the end of my first half that I do think need to change. I had gone either way. I have a romance in my book that I had really worked on its development in my last draft, but then this draft needed to cut a lot of that, and then I was worried that it would be underdeveloped. And guess what, guys? It is underdeveloped now. That's okay, because we get to try both sides out until we can find a happy middle, and that's what I'm going for now. I feel really grounded in that decision now to go add back in some of the things that I want, and also add more things that I didn't have in the first place. But then the name of the game is finishing this draft, which again, I've had all of February and I haven't made any progress. But to be fair, February was really about soul searching on what this next half needed, what I needed to fix at the end of the first half that wasn't sitting right with me. I kind of want this book to be finished by April 15th. And by finished, I mean ready to query ? That's not going to happen. But here's the thing. I think if we shoot for that, it'll put me in a better spot. If I could finish Act 2B by Saturday night, that'd be really great. Now, you might be thinking, that's kind of crazy, right? Here's the thing. While I am still fixing this thing from Act 2A, I'm going to finish that today. And then I'm going to go back to Act 2B, but I already have 3 chapters in Act 2B done. I did do that in February, even though I keep forgetting that I did that. That means that I have 9 left in Act 2B, 9 chapters left in Act 2B. And some of them are going to be a lot of work, but others aren't. This is where my other goal comes into play. We're going to be a full-time writer with a part-time job. What does a full-time writer with a part-time job do? I'm going to see if I can spend 4 hours each day writing, and that is already not looking so good for today. I was literally just here yesterday talking about how I only have that one little, section of the first half that I have to fix before I can move on finally to the second half in full force. Obviously, I've written 3 chapters in the second half already. The problem is that they're all in a certain character's POV, and I haven't been able to go back to the other characters because I'm stuck on this block with them in the first half. Both of the scenes that need to be fixed in the end of Act 2A are between them, and there's 2. The second one's not so bad. It just would change based on what happens in the first one. But that first one I've been working on, going back and forth on my thoughts for it for the past week, honestly. Even when I wasn't saying I wasn't working on it, it was really because every time I went and looked at it and thought about this, I was like, I don't know how it's gonna work. And so I decided that I needed to bring back stuff from an old draft, and I did, but then I couldn't make it work. I'm so sick and tired of hearing myself talk about this to everyone around me, but I couldn't figure out how to make it work. And then yesterday I was like, okay, I'm gonna work X amount of hours on this, and I was, but I wasn't making any progress. I was just like rehashing the same scene over and over again and changing POVs and then being like, wait, no, I can't even like describe what's wrong with it. There's a lot of dialogue that has to be covered because this is a conversation that needs to happen. I think I have a lot of high standards for realistic dialogue, and I also don't think characters, when they're sharing vulnerable things, I don't think they should really be saying exactly what they mean, at least not all the time. It means the words need to be very well crafted, but it also needs to feel right. But there's also a certain point where characters can't be completely lying to themselves and to others anymore. And this is kind of at that point where it's like the tipping point. And also they have really weird logic that they're dealing with, which I know is bad logic. It's purposefully bad logic, informed by their experiences. And they have to like understand that this logic is wrong. But sometimes writing it out, it's like, it looks like bad writing rather than bad logic by the characters, and so you have to find that balance. Anyways, I went through it all with my husband last night. He had some helpful input, and then I went, but I was still like freaking out. I talked to my mom. My mom wanted me to call her last night to like role play it with her, but I was like, no, I can do this. I can figure this out. But then I couldn't. I need to have more romantic moments between these two characters before actual romantic moves get made, right? Before they kiss. My mom was like, Rain, just send me every single scene between them leading up to this one and a document with only that, and then tomorrow we'll go through it and brainstorm what needs to be added. I need to add fun little like moments and tidbits. I need to like increase the flirting. That's the fun part. What's not fun is what's happening right here in this scene, and I need it to be figured out. Not the flirting part. I have the flirting part in the scene, but I need the emotional part. The vulnerable part is the part that's not working right now. But I did what she asked me to do, and then this morning I called her at like 9 a.m. my time, 8 a.m. her time, not to make her do this with me, but just to be like, I sent it to you. And also I'm awake working on the scene again, and I'm losing my mind. And she immediately was like, all right, let me open this email. She starts reading the document from the beginning and starts like their first meeting. Okay. Starts reading the document through. Sees their first meeting. She's like, okay, she needs to think he's the most beautiful man she's ever seen. And I'm like, okay, she can't yet because of XYZ reason. Like, she's not in the headspace, but I see where you're at. And so then my mom just like proceeds to be Miss Romanticy Queen over here. And even though I can't always like do what she wants, she's not wrong for like wanting something there. So I can take that and be like, okay, maybe she can't say that. She can say XYZ thing. This is not the main issue though. The main issue is again this last scene. And then she just starts reading through like what is basically the script version of what I have for that in the last scene. And she's like, this is amazing. This is great. I still hate it for some reason, but I feel like I am seeing it in a different light now after having done all that beginning stuff with her and going through all of it and figuring out where to like play things up between them. I don't know. It's 10:53 and I guess I've technically been working on this since 9, but I'm gonna get back to it. Certainly feels like a full-time job at this point, considering I am never getting a break from the scene. At some point, I really do need to focus on that part-time job portion of things, as not only did the scene best me yesterday, but grading did as well. I did not accomplish what I needed to there. How much time I spent writing yesterday, but it was a lot. It was like hours and hours of it. I got up early, 8 a.m. I was on the phone with my mother talking over things around 9 to 10. And then I worked on that singular problem chapter up until like 1 p.m., I think, or 2 p.m. I ended up sending that chapter to my mom, and she was like, oh my God, I love it. It's perfect. It's not. Don't believe her. That is high praise coming from her, but I think her brain's a little warped right now from how many versions she's seen. It needs a little work, but it's passable for now. We can move past it. And then I started fixing the last chapter in that section that needs to change to match the changes. I didn't really finish that. I might just move on, I think. I need to come back to that, but I might move on. And then today, it's Wednesday. I have not been doing my writing as a full-time job. I've been doing my TA because I barely did any yesterday. Well, that's not true. I've been grading, but everything's a mess. I need to get stuff done today for writing. Today when I went to go work on myself at the coffee shop, I couldn't move on because I realized that the drive over was
stressful because I was listening to a book that was not capturing my attention. So instead of listening to anything that was happening in the book, I was just thinking about all these questions that I have world building wise, which, draft 3, I'm still having world building questions. It's not great. And so instead of focusing on the chapter that I was supposed to focus on at the coffee shop, I just wrote down a bunch of questions that I still had and kind of went through them one by one. And I have some new ideas that would need a lot of restructuring, or would need a lot of work in Act 1 and Act 2, build up some foreshadowing so this doesn't come out of nowhere. But anyways, I have enlisted my husband tonight to go out to eat with me. So that's my reward, my persuasion. It's what I'm doing so that I can completely occupy his time for like a good portion of the night and word vomit all of this random shit and see what comes out. Anyways, I got my little notebook. I have notes on my phone as well for what I decided on today at the coffee shop. And gotta get some margaritas, some chips and salsa, tacos probably, and we're gonna figure some things out. Checked in last night. I think I was going out to dinner with my husband because instead of focusing on getting a chapter done yesterday, I just couldn't do it. I just focused on all the unanswered questions that were in my head that were kind of acting as blocks for this section of the paper. I came up with reasons for why certain things are happening and motivations for certain antagonists that, while I'd had some version of it before, it either wasn't fleshed out enough or didn't make sense anymore with the way other plot changes happened, okay? And so I really tried to focus on why is a person doing something now, given all this? How does it tie in with the overall themes? If antagonists are doing something weird, especially if they're people that are maybe unexpected antagonists, like formerly close to the protagonists type of people, I want their weird bad decisions to be reflective of like the wrong choice for the protagonist rather than just being something that like makes the plot work, which is hard, and a lot of changes have happened, and I needed things to make sense. I needed to work through it. But also there's all this, magical stuff that's happening that does not make sense unless you properly foreshadow. But again, when things change, the magical things change as well. I came up with a plan. I came up with answers to how certain things are working magically and answers to why my characters are doing things and feel a certain way and how that relates to the theme. I feel better about it. It's still one of the things where it's massive enough of like a change or addition, really. It's almost paralyzing when you're like really, really, really far in a draft and you've discovered something that needs to happen and needs to be the truth for the story, but it requires a lot of like fixing things in the first half of the book or adding things in the first half of the book. And the best action forward is different for everyone. For me at this point in time, I don't think I really don't think I should go back and start fitting all that in. I think I'm just so close to like being really far in this draft and being on the, tail end and getting things done that I need to just keep moving forward. And what I'll probably do is after I do that, I'll try and come in and fit it into this version of the draft and see if that works rather than waiting until the next version. While I know that I need to move forward, it is paralyzing to write things and knowing that it's coming out of nowhere, right? It feels wrong to be like, this makes no sense in this version of the story that this is happening. Just accept it as bad and like fixing it later, especially when it's draft 3 and you're trying to have things not sound bad anymore, but it just happens. It's what I need to do. It's Friday afternoon. I need to do a walk, and then after that, clean. But I would like to see if I could spend some of my night staying up a bit later than usual and seeing if I can finish or at least block out. Let's go for that. Let's not say finish. Let's say that we are aiming to block out the entirety of the last 2 chapters in this section of Act 2B. Act 2B is split into 2, okay? I have this pinch point section, and then I have the plot turn, everything's falling apart section, right? I'm in the first section. I have 2 chapters left. They're chapters with pretty massive goals, but I'm going to see if I can at least block out every section, even if it's like just dialogue blocking. Again, I have the old version, the draft 2 version of this, but then after that, all I would have is Act 3. In Act 3, I have like 3 chapters that are like still kind of Act 2B-ish. Like they could go in Act 2B, but the way I'm splitting it up, it's going in Act 3. So I have those 3 chapters. The rest is the finale, and the finale is like 18,000 words. I don't know how many words it'll be in this version though. So we're gonna see, you guys. We're gonna see. I do think getting this query ready by April 16th
is delusional, but that's kind of the point. I really want to try and make a delusional goal that I'm like trying my best to stick to, because that's like the only way that I'm actually going to make a lot of progress. And even if I don't meet that goal, I'll have a book that's almost query ready by then, or like really close, way closer than it would have been had I not had this crazy delusional goal.
Okay, y'all, I did end up treating writing as my full-time job. I did not end up recording the amount of time that I spent working each day the past month as I had wanted to, nor did I get a ton of daily footage where I updated my progress as I went. That's honestly because after some health issues that kind of messed up that first week, I just got like really sucked in. For the next basically 3 weeks became my life to just wake up and work on my book, even when I had other things that I had to do. I was working on my book from like 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. on days where I had like the middle of the day open, and days where I had evenings open, it was from like 4 to 6 p.m. Most weekends I was working at least one day from around 10 a.m., maybe 11 a.m. to like 3 p.m. So I was working on it a lot. Tons of other things, and but I just wasn't really tracking it, even though it's all there. And my Scrivener stats are crazy. I'm not sure I believe them. I'll go ahead and include like a screenshot of them here for the month of March. I don't know how much I trust them. For those like large amounts of time that I was working, I did not necessarily work on the book for 4 hours straight. Sprints, for example, don't really work for me during revising and editing. I just kind of have to have these like dedicated chunks of time where I'm like sitting there thinking through things, processing what I want to do, looking at what I did before, and like making those changes as much as I can. When I was like restructuring big scenes that needed to change like a lot of things, that was when I tended to like work a shorter period of time, just because that like used a lot more energy brain wise, and I got burnt out a lot easier. But times where I was just kind of going through and reading and changing as I read and not making huge structural edits, I could spend a lot of time doing that. Where we left off in my last vlog and where we started off in this one, I had just finished 55% or so of my draft 3, so Act 1 and Act 2A were finished. I sent that to a beta reader that I connected with via Fiverr. I'm gonna make a separate video on that just because it was a good experience. I sent it to my mother, who's been helping me through a lot of this. She's been like one of my prime like alpha readers, I'd say, and I sent a portion of it to my critique group. I kind of just like let that sit in February. That was like the middle of February, and I let that sit while I just kind of focused on my ideas for what I wanted to do for the second half of the book, and like made sure I really had a good plan going before I got like really into the edits. And since I officially started this like challenge for myself of like treating this as if it was my full-time job in the beginning of March, that's when I really got sucked into the second half of the book and making a lot of progress there. So how did it feel to write so much? I definitely was concerned about getting burnt out, and there were times where I had to step away for a day or 2 days. I found that this was mostly when I was really frustrated by plot holes where I felt like I couldn't figure out a good solution. Anytime where there was chapters that were being combined or restructured, and I was trying to like maintain all these elements of things that I needed, but I couldn't see the vision, or there was like a new plot hole that I hadn't thought about before that like all of a sudden popped up, or there was like, a character where I was like, wow, their motivations make no sense. Those were the times where I would get burnt out a lot easier and be frustrated and have to step away. When I was working on chapters or scenes where that wasn't the case and my vision was super, super clear, or maybe I had issues and then I had a clearer vision, all of those sessions, I could work a lot longer. I was a lot more motivated, and it would bring me back to the book because I kept wanting to see it through. So that's kind of how I felt. It wasn't necessarily the amount of time I was spending on it. It was how many like roadblocks I encountered. That was what made me feel like I was getting close to being burnt out or needed to take a step back. That was kind of how I guided myself. I actually ended up wanting to work on it a lot. The more I worked on a lot of it, the more I needed to keep coming back to it, I felt, and that's kind of why this vlog ended up spanning so much time rather than just being a week as I had planned in the beginning. It made me want to ignore my other obligations, which is not great. Even times when I was supposed to be working on like grading or PhD obligations, I did what I had to do, but I didn't go further. And even like today, I'm not supposed to be working on book stuff or writing stuff. I'm supposed to be working on PhD stuff, and so, but I'm doing this and I'm thinking about my next moves, but it is what it is. I guess it's a good thing that after all this I still really am interested in working on the book, we'll get to that though, because I don't know, maybe I'm not, we'll see. I guess we'll jump into that now. What are my next plans, given that I've finished a draft? Well, it is March 24th. I finished that draft on the 21st, Saturday. My goal was to then pass it on to beta readers and my mother and some critique partners, and to then start thinking more about like detailed scene level edits, some line edits and refining. However, there are a few problems. I'll start with the easiest to address. The ending, or all of Act 3 really, is not where it needs to be, or not where I want it to be, at least. There is so much that I really tried to foreshadow and set up in the earlier half, and I thought that I did a lot more this round to get there. I definitely did, but it's still not where it needs to be. It's still not succeeding. There's still things that come across somewhat random in Act 3. Things that need to make sense in terms of world building and the magic system, stuff that logic needs to be echoed earlier on so that it doesn't feel out of nowhere and makes sense. Still very readable and very book-like, and the character arcs for the main characters do make sense. The antagonists' character arcs and some of their motivations make less sense, and I think that's because of the things that I'm missing. To address this, I think what I want to do is to, in my next draft, first do like a really detailed reread of Act 3 and just focus on everything that I think could be further reinforced or added, requires more foreshadowing and setup in the earlier half, and just like make a list of those things, and then with ideas for how to address that with the least amount of text being added as possible, right? Like ways that I could just level up what I'm already doing, or areas where I do need to add more. So that's one problem. I'll get to whether or not I think I can actually do that next in a second, but let's go to my other issue. I have received some like really helpful and interesting feedback from critique partners about the midpoint recently. However, it also started to make me question my vision for the story a little bit and some of the character arcs. And okay, just to like give some background on how me and my critique group work, we've been meeting since last February or March, and they've been getting a few chapters of my book at a time, sometimes a lot, sometimes a chunk since then, monthly or bi-monthly, or sometimes more frequently, sometimes with a lot of time in between. And those chapters have spanned the first draft to this like third draft, and I have a lot of iterations in between, honestly, right? And so there's been a lot of changes to earlier materials that they have not read, even though I do kind of sum that up for them when I'm giving new chapters. But also they're reading a lot of these like sometimes months apart from like sections earlier that would have been relevant to the section that they're reading. I think I'm in a spot of working on this book where this structure of feedback for this project is less helpful, because we're bringing up a lot of good ideas that are just kind of like really interesting, but are starting to like diverge more and more from the vision because we're still so focused on what's happening in those chapters. I think I'm at a point in revising this novel where regular feedback on portions of the book read by people who haven't seen the most current version and who also don't have all the details at the front of their mind is like starting to be less helpful, basically. Their feedback, again, is great. I love my critique partners. I've implemented so much of it over the past year. I think I have to do a better job of remembering who my characters are and sticking to my vision for those characters, especially given how far along I am in this process. I think I have to reinforce what's already there, the journeys that I already have outlined for them, rather than trying to add new aspects to them or change the way that their arcs are meant to be, because at this point in the process I cannot do that without changing a lot of the book again, and I'm not sure that it would necessarily be for the best, rather than just to see if that's better. I can refine and clarify my characters. I can work on making their internal arcs clearer and more thorough and like consistent and melding with the rest of the book, and I can make sure that their growth is actually showing. And I think reading these chapters piecemeal, for whatever reason, I can't explain why, at this so far into the book, I think it sets us up for some feedback where we can go down a lot of rabbit holes and ideas that are starting to get like farther away from who the character is, if that makes sense. That's what this is for. It's like for like playing around in the space with your friends and your like writing colleagues and thinking of cool ideas. And sometimes you're gonna get a lot of really good stuff. Sometimes there are times where you have to, you know, learn to discern what's the most helpful and where to trust your instincts, and that's really hard for me, to be honest. I like taking feedback from other people and finding a way to implement it. A lot of the time there's the like advice, I know Brandon Sanderson says it, other people say it too, that like beta readers and critique partners will often know when something is wrong with your story, but their suggestions for how to fix it will be wrong. I think I've heard that about like editors as well. The suggestions will be wrong, but look at what those suggestions are telling you about what is missing and find your own solution. And I think a lot of this is that the current character arcs that I have, I've done a lot of work on them. They still need to be, a lot of the interiority and like actions and like growth over time, I think still needs to be like a little bit more clear. They're clear to me, but sometimes you have to just like be super clear and like hit the reader over the head with like what's going on internally. And I think that's what's going on. I think I don't need to change who they are or their growth. I think I can stick with my vision of like what their growth should look like, but I need to be very clear about what's happening so that it actually makes sense and is moving the story forward, and characters are not, you know, doing things that maybe lead the reader to say, why are they doing that? I think I have things set up for what my characters are doing to make sense to me and to who they are, but I'm not actually justifying that well enough on page, is what I think. So again, that's addressable. So is the Act 3 stuff. That's all addressable stuff. But what comes next is the issue that's most challenging for me to address, and my biggest issue in general, and it's been my biggest issue for a while, and it's also the one making me crash out the most. I really want to query this novel for traditional publishing and for literary agent representation, but to do that, it needs to be at least under 120,000 words, and even that is pushing it. There are a lot of agents who are auto-rejecting over 100,000, and I understand why. It makes sense. And I honestly do believe that many books can be edited to be more concise and clearly written and use better word economy so that they are under 100K or under 120K. So I feel that way, and yet I'm still having trouble with this myself and still questioning like what the actual issues here. So let's dive into that, right? The last draft 2, was ungodly large. And then in this draft, because of that, I made a lot of plans to combine chapters, cut scenes all together, completely cut subplots from this version, and just completely restructured a lot so that I was getting rid of anything that was unnecessary. All the scenes were doing we're addressing multiple areas, like internal arcs, external plots, romance, plot development, foreshadowing and world building and mystery stuff. All that has to be addressed. Every scene doesn't meet like every element, but it needs to meet like 3 of those basically. And that's how I've structured draft 3. So I'm already like trying to do that. However, I have 3 characters that are POV characters, and I have 2 timelines also. It's ambitious, and all of those character arcs and timelines need to meet beats, and this needs to be fulfilling. Work needs to be done so that the pacing is tight, but that things are getting set up for everybody. Basically, I ended this draft with 132,000 words, which honestly feels embarrassing to admit, considering how hard I worked for this to not happen. I spent months on this, right? I spent months on trying to make sure that I was on target for pacing. Obviously, I knew last month that I wasn't, but I was like, maybe at the end I'll figure it out. No, I didn't. Act 2A and Act 2B are both over about 6K. My Act 2A is like a bit larger, but it also encompasses like a larger portion of the story. So like it's fine, it's proportionate. For both of the sections, I think about 6K over is what they are, based on my like math and ideas of like what it should be and the pacing that it needs to have. Technically, Act 1 is right on point. It's about 28,000 words, 29,000. Act 3 is fine. Technically, it's like at 26,000. I think it could be shorter by like a lot. Goal-wise, I think I had hoped for like a 20,000 Act 3. I gotta explore that. However, for Act 2, what is needed is obviously not just fine-tuning language. I definitely think that for all of Act 2, I could get rid of a good chunk just by trying to have better word economy and going through and like being really diligent, especially in Act 2B, about cutting redundancies and just writing things more clearly. 12,000 words is not something that you can fix just by that, in my opinion. I think it is a sign that some scenes have to go. Again, it's hard though, because I'm drip feeding all these elements of a mystery and world building so that there's no info dumping and that things kind of feel very natural and the readers are learning things as the characters learn them. I'm doing that in such a very deliberate way that cutting any scene means then going through and finding all those elements that are talked about or discussed there and making sure that is then placed somewhere else, which then does run the risk of still adding word count, right? With everything that I get rid of. And again, I'm already like, oh, there's more foreshadowing and more world building details that need to be reinforced earlier on, and there's more character arc stuff that I need to like clearly like emphasize and refine so people understand why characters are doing certain things. All of that could very well mean more words, more net words, even if I'm cutting scenes. And so here's where we start to crash out. Okay, listen up, because this is a mess mentally. I have long felt like maybe this isn't the right book to query. I started to really have these doubts and feelings in September of last year when I finished and was going through my draft 2. It is ambitious, as one beta reader had said, and they meant it in a positive way. I'm starting to wonder if it's like ambitious in a way that's just like, I'm not at the skill level to get it under 120k and still be a good book. And it sucks because I've been working on this for 3 years with this intention to query it since September of last year, 2025. I've basically had the same crash out every few months of, is this just fundamentally not queryable? Is it just not fit for traditional publishing, at least from the standpoint of a debut author? Here's the thing, based on beta reader feedback and people who are reading it and like people whose like feedback I trust, I do think it's extremely well paced. I do think that it's very readable, especially in the version that it's in now. I think it is interesting. So I don't necessarily think that the book is impacted so much by the issues it currently has. I think things need to be better explained, but I think it keeps reader reading, is what I've heard from the feedback that I've gotten. I think it has a lot of potential. Even if I manage to get it down to 120k, which I don't know if I can, still likely to be an auto reject for many agents because of the size. Additionally, while the fantasy element, I would consider it more grounded, especially given that it's like got a bit of a historical feel to it, some like Renaissance and Baroque Italian Venetian vibes, at least for one of the main settings. It is still a second world and thus is still high fantasy. This is an oversaturated genre that many agents do not want to see queries from right now, and I completely understand why. Additionally, it's very dream-centric, and that's like the whole magic system, right? And that's also like a thing some agents don't want, and I can kind of understand that too, unfortunately. While I have no problem trying to query and failing and then moving on, it feels harder and harder to continue to push myself into like making this the best version it can possibly be if I feel like it's still destined to fail in the query process, if I feel like it has like no shot to begin with, right? Additionally, I have easier, higher concept, friendlier project ideas that are like fully outlined with like multiple scenes ready to go to be fully drafted whenever I like can like get past this like monster of this book. I'm constantly wondering if I'm just like shooting myself in the foot and like missing like the opportunity to capitalize on these trends that I think I generally have like unique and interesting takes on, because I won't let this project go. My neighbor was mowing, so I did have to come inside, but the other thing on my mind is how much of this is me just being dramatic and rejecting myself before I even give myself the opportunity to be rejected by others. I like haven't even started to query yet, and I'm already like taking myself, you know, out of the running. But still, at the same time, I'm like, these are reasons for automatic rejection, and maybe it's just too ambitious. Basically, I'm feeling 100 different ways all the time, and yeah, that's that. For what's next, I think I will push myself to do one more draft, a quick turnaround draft, where the only focus is cutting and slashing scenes that I've identified as like potentially being able to be cut and like having their important bits squished into other places, even though again, I'm really not sure that I can do that. But the amount of words I need to get rid of is not wordsmithing amount. I can absolutely go through, especially the second half of the book, I think, go through with like a fine-tooth comb and like fix language issues and be more concise and less redundant. But that is not 12,000 words, right? So I think I need to first take one more bird's eye view, cut scenes, and just see what it looks like and kind of view it as more of a draft 3.5 rather than a draft 4. And then see if that is even achievable, even if how the draft looks once I've done that, if it feels worth it to further go through and wordsmith and like just be cleaner. And then what does that leave me in terms of space for adding all these elements that I need to add? I think I can shave off 1,000 words in Act 1, maybe. I think I identified like 2 scenes in Act 2A and 2 to 3 in Act 2B where I can maybe cut or combine and just kind of like see what happens. It's kind of hard because like there are some subplots that might just have to be like, there's like a second romantic subplot that I'm like, well, maybe it just doesn't get the time, but it's like my queer subplot and I feel really strongly about it. So yeah, that kind of makes me sad to think about, to be honest, but it's also like maybe I just can't have everything, you know? And again, even then, I'm really not sure that it is possible. I'm really not sure that I can spend this much time on it one more month and not come out with the same problem at the end, or with a whole lot of more issues that need to be addressed that could only then be addressed by adding words. I don't know. Again, maybe I'm naive to feel this way. Maybe I'm not, my talent isn't there. but I want this to be a quick turnaround. I don't want to dilly-dally. I want to make the cuts, see what it looks like, and then decide if it's time to move on or time to get it ready to query. I wanted to practice pitching to an agent at a conference in mid-April. I don't think that's gonna be achievable. It's a good goal. It definitely made me work a little bit faster this past month. I just want, like at the end of this next month, I want to know if I can move on from this. I just want to know.